And so one chilly night, our hero named Rayon arrived from yet another mission, for which he was praised. He was busy destroying all assigned targets and obeying his master. And here is the master himself. His name is Tellus, Robert Tellus. Our hero has a very developed killer's instinct, and it does not give him rest because he feels whispers, as if he would die today at the hands of this man. Tellus turned to him and praised him for successfully completing his next task. Our hero was the head of the shadows. Thanks to the work done today, Tellus's family will gain strength faster. Our hero bowed to him and stated that he was doing all of this and taking it all for granted. Tellus decided to test Rayon and asked him a question. Can a shadow resist the dictates of the body it repeats after? The answer to his question was that a shadow is called to follow the will of its master. It cannot have its own will, feelings, or opinions. Tellus realized that he had answered the question correctly, but he didn't understand how Rayon dared to act on his own free will, and how he managed to free himself from the brainwashing. It was not clear to our hero how he had determined all of this. Because with the brainwashing, the Robert family controls the shadows. It is their own group of killers. They steal or buy children from poor families and make murderers out of them. These children do all the dirty work and take the blame for the consequences until they die. In other words, they grow up to be the chain dogs of the Robert family. Our hero was also subjected to brainwashing, but one day he managed to accidentally get rid of these shackles. But how Tellus managed to find out about all this, he was not aware of it. Tellus explained that all shadows have two collars on them. One is brainwashing and the other is... He snapped his fingers and the second collar went into action. Our hero felt very bad. His mouth was bleeding and he was lying on the ground with dark energy around him. It was very hard for him to endure such intense pain. His heart felt like it was being torn in half. Tellus explained to him that this is the second collar. It's called the unstealing worm. There is an insect inside his body that will feast on his heart at Tellus's command. This is the most nightmarish spell in existence, letting you know what the slave is really feeling. Our hero frantically tried to fight the pain. He couldn't understand why Tellus was acting like a righteous and honest man. Hadn't he had enough brainwashing? Calling him a coward had made him extremely furious. Tellus called himself prudent because our hero had somehow managed to get rid of the brainwashing. He also added that all men wear masks, and it just so happens that Tellus's mask is more impenetrable than it appeared at first glance. Our hero was kidnapped at an age when his memories were still fuzzy, raised to be a hunting dog and killer who was loyal only to the Robert family. Until he became head of the shadows, he lived without his own emotions or thoughts. Then he accidentally learned a breathing technique called Ring of Fire. Once the best swordsman on the continent had mastered this technique, it was a divine skill and helped him get rid of the brainwashing. After getting rid of one of the collars, he began to dream of freedom. Hope was born in him. But instead of freedom, he was met with death. He didn't realize for what sins he had suffered such a senseless death. But he couldn't just accept it and began to let himself down despite the pain he was experiencing. He decided that if he was destined to die here under these conditions, at least he wouldn't die in vain. It wasn't clear to Tellus how Rayon got up under such a condition. Our hero got into a stance for a sharp dash to do at least some damage to Tellus. He wanted to take at least his arm with him, but in his condition, a simple wound on Tellus's body would have been enough for him. Throwing himself at him, he already saw that his death would not be in vain. But Tellus is not a simple man. He is very strong. Throwing him back with a powerful gust of wind, he looked at him and decided to continue the attack. After all, Rayon will be able to let him down. One of the last things Rayon saw in front of him was Tellus chopping Rayon's head off his shoulders with a wave of his hand, leaving him dead and unable to move, let alone fight. Tellus stood over Rayon and thought he had it all figured out, but he never expected to be able to dispel the brainwashing, much less attack him despite the pain of the raging worm. In Tellus's practice, it had been a long time since such a thing had happened. He couldn't even remember the last time he'd been hurt, and here was a bite from his own hunting dog. Since Rayon was dead, Tellus had nothing to worry about, so he ordered the other shadows to remove the body. The last moments of his life, Rayon only saw Tellus leave. It was impossible for him to kill him. Tellus is considered the strongest martial artist on the continent. There was nothing he could do to him at all. Nothing at all. He regretted that he had lived such a life, that he had been manipulated and humiliated, that he had never been able to complete the Ring of Fire. He didn't care who would help, whether it was a god or a demon. He was asking for someone to help him avenge his death. The pendant that was lying beside him glowed with blue light, but he didn't notice a notification appeared in front of him as if he was selected by Fury. Fury started to consume his body, but at that moment his body was already dead, and the notification gave an error. In the morning on a sunny day, everything went away as if it was a terrible dream. The girl was sitting and playing with a child, and as you have already realized, this child is our Rayon. He has moved into another body, and now he has big things ahead of him. Ego Mother couldn't be happy with her child. He couldn't get used to such affection. The woman who nursed him was named Sylvia. It was hard for him to believe that he was reborn and became this woman's child. All the memories of his previous life as a killer were preserved. He thought that he was dreaming, that he was just sleeping for 100 days in a row but never woke up no matter how much time passed. So he decided to accept the fact that he had been reborn and enjoy this life. Sylvia hoped that the head of the family would come back soon and reward the ego with a name. Our hero thought that he would finally be given a name, for he would not be called Sunshine forever. The head of the family didn't show up for more than 3 months. Most likely he was a very busy man. He didn't know much after he was reborn, but he knew that he was born into a rich family, and a famous one at that. After all, he was still waiting for the moment when he was strong enough to avenge his death. Rage and lust for death occupied all his thoughts, but he realized that he had to be patient. Since he hadn't left this room, he didn't realize where he was and what status he had in this family. Plus, in his previous life, he couldn't complete the Ring of Fire, so he needed to be even more patient. He was called the greatest assassin in the history of the Robert family. To get his revenge, he suppressed his emotions for as long as it took. He was curious about the status of the family, for the mansion was very large. It was unlikely they were just a famous family. It was more likely they were much more famous than they seemed. A maid came running into their room and addressed Miss Sylvia. She announced that the head of the family would be here soon. Sylvia realized that her father was already there, and our hero realized that the head of the family was his grandfather. Sylvia didn't even have time to prepare, as the head of the family was already in the palace. They all sensed him approaching them. Sylvia and the maid directed their gaze towards the doors. Our hero felt the tension in the air. The head of the family walked into the room with them and began to approach. His presence alone created a very heavy atmosphere. Our hero stared at him, and he already had an inkling of what kind of person he might be. The head of the family looked at the child, and our hero looked at him, and he was already sure who was standing in front of him. That golden hair, blazing red eyes, and a chilling aura. In front of him stood the strongest man of the continent, the head of the Sieghart family, the northern king of destruction, Glenn Sieghart. Apparently, our hero was reborn into the most powerful family in the entire continent. When he took him in his arms, he gave him a name. Naming the child Rayon, he told him that as the true bearer of that name, he should live as a shadow, as if he were here, but at the same time, he wasn't. How ironic to get the same name as in his previous life, thought our hero. Lying in his crib, he wondered if everyone in the manor had fallen asleep, because after 100 unbearable days, he finally had a chance to stay awake. After all, he had always wanted to sleep before, and when he woke up, it was always Sylvia by his side. He didn't have the opportunity to use mana and try to pump his skills. But now he was sleeping separately. This pleased him, and he decided to started to form a ring of fire, remembering his past life. He used the classic kind of training. That's when he just breathes and absorbs natural mana at the same time, concentrating the aura inside his energy core. But the ring of fire he had mastered was a little different. He had to do everything like the mages. It's when you use mana circulation, you create a special circle of energy circulation within yourself that allows you to increase your stamina, become stronger, smarter, and more sensitive to mana. Therefore, it is the best training technique with ideal conditions. It will help him become a martial artist. This technique gives him an advantage over strong opponents like Tellus, who knows nothing about the dragon ring. And so, using the Ring of Fire to strengthen his mind and body, and when he masters the Sieghard's sword-wielding technique, Tellus Robert's revenge on Tellus will no longer be just a dream. Afterward, he felt that there was energy flowing in his body that had a connection with the ice attribute, so he was freezing all the time. The number of blocked points is about 9. This is not good, because at this rate, he might die because of the cold blocked points. He decided to break them with a ring of fire, but at the same time he felt sorry to get rid of the purest ice energy. He decided to combine the ice energy with the flame current and spread it all over his body. Deep in the night, he finished his training. Even though it was short, he was wildly tired and laid down on his crib to sleep. Glenn came up to him and put his hand on him and wanted to feel the child's strength, but he was unable to do so. In the morning, he was again doing his baby duties and entertaining Sylvia, who was overjoyed to have such a good baby. Although Rayon was extremely unpleasant to play such games, he was a grown man, and the need to pretend to be a child made him want to howl. He was sure that freezing all the time was better than these caresses and amusements, but they were interrupted. Sylvia saw the old man and was glad to see him. The old man was also happy about this meeting, for they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Ron saw the old man and realized that it was the old man in rags. Divine power, medical techniques, and skills that had made him famous all over the world. Even though he was a famous doctor on the continent, he was also the most elusive because of his constant traveling. He heard that Sylvia had given birth to a child, so he decided to stop by and check on Rayon's condition. When he picked up the baby, he noticed that it was completely like its mother, blonde and red-eyed. "Not at all like Glenn," the old man remarked, asking what the baby's name was. To which Sylvia said the name Rayon, and the old man glanced over at her and asked, "I hope it's not in honor of the shadow." "Naming a baby after a shadow, what is Glenn thinking?" said the old man. Rayon thought it was informal to call Glenn by his first name. Rumors had reached him that the Northern King of Destruction and the Ragged Saint were best friends. Gramps picked Rayon up and looked at his condition. After scanning Rayon's body with his palm, he noticed that the little guy was in a bad state. Sylvia couldn't believe that there was a frost curse on her child. The child's mana circulation was blocked by the ice energy, and it would only get worse in the future. The old man also said that he should take care of the child, because if he was left to his own devices, he wouldn't be able to live for long. Sylvia was astonished to hear such bad news. The old man said he'd give a prescription, medicine for them to take more often. He was interrupted by the maid Glenn had sent. She was ready to escort him to the head of the family. Supposedly, he had insisted on coming to see him immediately. He left Sylvia. Rayon realized that it is a frost curse and must be fought to live on and carry out his revenge. Since he is in charge of forming the Ring of Fire, it's a bit of a problem for him. A tear fell on his face at that moment. Distracted from his thoughts, he saw Sylvia all shaky and crying. She wasn't ready to lose the only child she had. She sobbed harder and harder, saying that she couldn't lose her child for nothing. She vowed that she would do everything in her power to make her baby get better. Rayon felt a pain in his chest. He didn't realize what it was. His heart felt like it was going to burst. He was in terrible pain, his whole body aching and in terrible pain. It was agonizing to watch this, and he took her cheek to stop sobbing. When she opened her eyes, she saw the baby's hand on her cheek. She stopped and looked at him. He was reaching for her and trying to say the word mommy. Glenn was sitting with the old man as they heard a noise outside the door. It was Sylvia who the servants were trying to stop. She burst into their study despite the head of the family forbidding anyone to enter their room. Staring at them, she heard her father say, "What kind of behavior is this, Sylvia? Where are your manners?" She bowed to the old man and begged him to save Rayon. She begged him to save her son because this child is everything to her. But Glenn didn't think to save him, giving one of his reasons as a perfect example of the thorny path of a martial artist. Why would he help someone who can't contribute to his family? Sylvia reminded Glenn that it was his grandson after all. But Glenn didn't care because she had fathered him when she ran away from the family. He was willing to give him only the name of Sieghard and told her not to ask for more. Then asked the guards to escort her out of the office. She begged, but Glenn didn't care. They took her out of the office, and the old man's conversation with Glenn continued. The old man called Glenn a stubborn sheep. After all, he had called the old man himself to look at his grandson's condition. Glenn asked to lay out the details that the old man had learned. The old man said that the 9 mana streams were blocked by ice energy, and the condition would continue to worsen with age. Thanks to Glenn's aura suppressing the cold, he would be fine for a while, but he would barely be able to become a martial artist. Glenn didn't care, but as long as the little guy was alive, it was fine. The old man knew that Glenn liked the little guy. He also wondered why name the baby Rayon. The world was full of beautiful names. Why name him Shadow? He answered him that the name Raon itself did not mean shadow. Thousands of years ago, it had a different meaning. It originally meant happy or joyful. The next day, Rayon was brought the medicine that the ragged saint had given them. It was a little bitter, so Sylvia and Helen prayed that Rayon would like it and not start sobbing. When she opened her eyes, she saw that he wasn't crying, and he even felt good about it. They were very happy with the way the child was taking the medicine. They even thought that he understood that he had to drink it. Rayon felt good, because this medicine had the attribute of fire. It helped him fight the frost curse. He let them give him the medicine to get better faster. It's been 2 years since he started training and taking the drug. Thanks to the drug, the creation of the Ring of Fire is well underway. He has spent 2 years in constant training. Interrupted only for silly games with Helen and Sylvia, there was no more diligent child on the entire continent than him. He practiced while everyone was asleep. Time continued to fly. He was 5 years old. At this point, he already had the 2nd stage of the Ring of Fire. He had increased spirit resistance, increased susceptibility to mana, increased willpower, and increased the amount of energy in him. He was pleased with this progress. His cross-energy circulation opened up, as well as his mana sensing became better. He was distracted by these notifications. Helen came in and was surprised that he was awake this early, and while she was taking his laundry, he realized that this window of information was only visible to him. They've been appearing to him since he reached the 1st stage of the Ring of Fire. At first, he didn't understand where it was coming from. But this system was convenient. It allowed him to keep track of his current status. Judging from Helen's reaction that time, the information window is only visible to Rayon. Even though he had reached the 2nd stage, his low stamina and frost curse hadn't gone anywhere. If he didn't have the fire attribute medicine, it would be more difficult for him to improve. The medicine was helping, but all these 5 years, Sylvia, Helen, all the other servants in the annex were constantly concerned about his well-being. It was like he was the crown prince at death, which also played a part. He only turned 5 years old and still has plenty of time. He definitely won't be in a hurry. The frost curse is still a problem for him, as well as his low stamina. Because of them, he gets tired quickly, after barely starting to move actively. In his past life, he was called the Greatest Assassin, where he discovered the extraordinary Ring of Fire technique. He believes that if he learns it fully, based on the experience of his previous life, all his ailments will disappear at once. And once he learns Sieghart's swordsmanship, he will be able to take Tellus's head off. But he can't hurry, because Tellus is one of the strongest swordsmen on the continent. If he goes mad with vengeance when he meets him, he won't defeat him. After all, you can count on your fingers the number of people who are able to kill him at all. You need to gain strength, and as soon as there is an opportunity to strike a crushing blow, he needs to keep practicing. Sylvia came by and reminded him that they had to go to one of the events today. She brought him some clothes and said she'd wait for him downstairs. He remembered that it was the day called 6 Emperors, 5 Demons, the forces that keep the balance on the continent. The Sieghart family that I was reborn in belongs to the 6 Emperors. The 6 Emperors act as the forces of good, and the 5 Demons as the forces of evil. In order to find out if the scales are tipping in one direction or the other, there is a determination ceremony to find out if an unknown variable has appeared in any family. And today was the day of the determination ceremony for the Siegharts. Everyone was getting ready, and little by little they were huddled together, talking in the hall about all sorts of things. As soon as they entered the hall, people started whispering, saying Sylvia is an outcast. How could she dare to come here? They weren't happy to see an outcast at the ceremony. They also started discussing Rayon, saying he was so tiny because of his illness. They said all sorts of things, even that he had inherited the blood of a loser, or rather an outcast. As they walked along, they were discussed and talked about. Rayon didn't care about their talk, he was above it all. But the insults in their direction didn't stop. Rayon was walking and looking straight ahead of him as he heard his mother say, "It's all right, Rayon. Look only at me," said Sylvia. As they approached their seats, they heard everyone begin to greet the head of the Siegart family. His grandfather came onto the stage and sat down in a chair. Rayon hadn't seen him in 5 whole years. After introducing Glenn Siegart to everyone in the audience, he sat in a chair and said, "It looks like everyone is gathered." He raised a sword with his hand, which rose in the middle of the great hall. It was the sword of justice, and thus began the ceremony of determination. This sword of justice, if you touch it, it instantly counters the mana predisposition. They began to summon the children one by one. Boren Siegart will go first. The one immediately shouted his presence and ran up to the sword. Starting at the age of 4, the mana channel in a child's skull that opens towards the heavens begins to close. After that, the mana level no longer changes significantly. Therefore, children are also brought to the determination ceremony in order to recognize their potential. Actually, now the evaluation is taking place, as we can see the sword glowing with green colors and wind gusts. The audience realized that it was wind, and judging by the light coming from the sword, a high-frequency attribute. People applauded and cheered at the child's strength. Glenn remarked that it was a suitable attribute for a swordmaster to focus on wind development in the future. Luna Slayon of the Slayon vassal family was summoned next. Raon understood the working principle of the sword. The path length of the rays of light determines the purity of mana, and the attribute mana is displayed on the swirls themselves. This is how Siegarts determine the talents of children. He also noticed that a person's worth is really only determined by their talent. He knew that he wouldn't do well. Even though the ring of fire was already of the second stage, the attribute of ice was still present in his energy. The last name called was Rayon Siegart, as one would expect. Everyone turned on him as an outcast. He stared at the sword in front of him without giving any sign. Glenn wondered what the outcome would be for this kid. He was asked to step forward and begin the skill assessment. Sylvia said it was time for him to take the test. Raon didn't have any special expectations. He just wanted to know which mana attribute suited this body and which attribute he should develop in the future. Sylvia told him that all he needed to do was to repeat after everyone else. As he approached the sword, he sighed heavily and touched the sword. A golden energy glowed around the sword. He was greatly surprised, not realizing what this light was. And then a vision appeared to him, a multitude of monsters staring at the man at the center of the event. He did not understand what kind of scene he was witnessing and how he could understand what he saw. He also didn't understand what kind of person was standing with his back to him. After that, the monsters roared, and the man raised a sword above him, which emitted the same golden energy as the sword in the hall. With a sweep of his sword, he began to chop the monsters left and right, destroying everyone and everything. After such a strong sweep of his sword, there was a powerful explosion. Ron was mesmerized by what was happening. When he woke up from his vision, he noticed that the surge of his energy had not even traveled halfway. Everyone in the hall laughing and whispering, saying that it was the first time they had ever seen such a short burst. They had only seen colorless mana. Glenn thought that even the god of battle was indifferent to the child of a fugitive. Sylvia walked over to Rayon and said it was okay, he did the right thing. Everyone just kept whispering amongst themselves and humoring them like that. But Glenn couldn't take it anymore and said to the whole room, "That's enough." Everyone stared at him with fear. Glenn continued that the hall was too noisy, and then declared that the determination ceremony was over. Everyone disperse. Everyone smilingly dispersed. One of the servants beckoned Boren to come with him and escorted him to the exit. Glenn sat and looked at the sword. "There seems to be nothing to be done," Glenn said. He hadn't expected much, but what was it? Thinking back, he sat looking at the sword, which glowed again. He couldn't understand why it happened. The sword blazed with golden energy all the way to the ceiling of the building. He couldn't take his eyes off the sword and looked at the golden glow. Seeing this golden light like the sun, he remembered that it was similar to the aura of the first head of the Sieghart family. It contained a supernatural firepower that even demonic flames were not equal to. Golden-colored mana and golden flames, they had only appeared once in the entire history of the Siegharts. Mana of thick golden light, dazzlingly beautiful and radiantly bright. Golden flame. He couldn't take his eyes off such a sight and asked, "Rayon, what are you—" After the determination ceremony, a whole 7 years flew by. He turned 12 years old. At this time, Rayon looked at his stats and decided to pump himself up to the 3rd step. With constant training, he had almost reached the ring of the 3rd stage. Things would go much faster if he dealt with the ice. His resistance to the water attribute had advanced to the 2nd stage, so he was no longer freezing. It was still hard for him to move actively, but his condition had improved greatly. He was already ready to engage in physical training. Sylvia came up to him and asked why he was loitering here. After all, they might be late for one of the important events. He realized that it was time for the next determination ceremony, and he would have to face those annoying bastards again. The ceremony went very quickly, as only the side branches participated. And now that the ceremony was over, he heard Glenn say his name and was surprised. Glenn had contacted him about the order Rayon should have received to begin basic training, but he hadn't sent a reply for a month. Rayon was unaware of any order, much less any basic training, but Sylvia stood up for him. Speaking to the head of the family, she said that Rayon still had a lot of ice energy, and it was hard for him to practice. But Rayon still didn't understand how Sylvia knew about it, and why she didn't tell him anything about it. But Glenn objected to her, Mole, while they are in the Sieghart domain. They should obey all the rules, especially when one bears the name of the Sieghart family. You can't walk, crawl, but train. That's the Sieghart way. She tried to ask for just a little more time for her baby, but Glenn didn't let her finish asking her. Maybe you want to run away from the family again? With this baby? On these lands, she was to live as a Sieghart, and she was to bark to her father. There was noise from various voices in the hall again. People were discussing Sylvia and slinging mud. They whispered, and she had to stand quietly and listen to it all. Rayon knew why Sylvia was treated so badly. After all, she had run away from her family earlier. It was obvious that she had studied martial arts, but she had no aura, so it was likely that she had lost her energy core and her mana flow had stopped. That was the price of marrying Rayon's father. But he died while she was pregnant with Rayon, and she had no choice but to go back to her father. It was obvious that a member of the main branch who left the family dishonorably of his own free will was doomed to ridicule if he suddenly decided to return. However, these are only the stupid words of shallow people. As long as Rayon is Sylvia's son, he doesn't agree to calmly look at such treatment of her. He went straight to Glenn despite Sylvia's words not to do so. After telling Sylvia that it was okay, he went to the head of the gym and said that he would follow the order and start training from next month. The instructor of the first martial arts hall turned to him. "Young master, don't you know that even though this is basic training, a sick person can't endure it?" Rayon stated that everything would be fine. Since it was the only way to continue to carry on the Sieghart name, he was willing to attend training. Glenn turned to the boy if he knew the true weight of the name. Rayon felt a very strong aura trying to sweep him off his feet, but he fought as best he could. A small drop of blood dripped near his foot. It was the effects of resisting Glenn's aura. Rayon felt as if it was trying to crush him. Glenn just looked at Rayon and his heart began to pound non-stop. He could feel how much stronger Glenn was than the Robert family. Feeling the power of the Northern King of Destruction, he fell to his knees. A maid came running up with Sylvia, and Sylvia asked her father to stop, for Rayon was too young. He doesn't know what he's saying. The instructor also appealed to Glenn to calm down, for he was just a little child. But Glenn shut them all up with one phrase. "I'm talking now." Sylvia hugged her son and continued to insist that he was not yet able to go to training, and begged her father to stop pushing his aura on him. Raon remembered how in his past life he had been an assassin, a man who lived in the shadows. He had always been closer to death than life, and had never stepped out of the shadows. But now that would be over with. He wasn't going to hide in the shadows anymore. From this day forward, he will not live as Rayon the Killer. He is now Rayon Sieghart. He has vowed to reclaim for Sylvia her original place. Standing in front of Glenn, he stated that he grew up in isolation, in the annex of the residence, so he doesn't know how powerful and influential the Sieghart family is in society. If training would clear that up, he was all for it. He was willing to fully protect his family as smiles and joy to the people who had become dear to him here. Staring at Glenn, he was full of strength and confidence. Glenn interrogated him. Mol Rayon was going to evaluate the Sieghart's standards in training, to which Rayon answered him that he had no choice in the matter. Glenn confronted Rayonic and said he would have the instructors do the training, so as not to disappoint him. At those words, Rayon felt sickened by Glenn's aura and collapsed right there. In his past life, he is a first-class assassin. Plus, he has a ring of fire, which is still only considered a legend. If he combines all his skills, then getting his place in this family is quite realistic. He was ready for anything, ready to show how strong he could become. In one of the training halls, the guys were practicing, and one of the instructors was watching them, then went to his colleague. It was the instructor of the second martial arts hall, Karun Sieghart. He was interested in Raon, as he had heard rumors that the boy was too weak to be active. Another instructor said that the maids had heard the old man in rags talking about a serious illness, and he was actually suffering from it. He noticed that the child's body was in poor condition today, as it always was, and he didn't understand how Rayon was able to withstand his father's aura. He also noticed that Sylvia was very talented, among many. Ordered that a maid be sent to their building and as soon as possible to inform them of everything that was going on there. Rayon tried to exercise and run, and Sylvia kept an eye on him to make sure he didn't overexert himself. Glenn, the head of the family, arrived at the Sieghart's fifth training room. In the room, Lamel was asleep on the couch. Glenn woke him up by entering the room. He greeted Glenn and noticed that he was the only one the sleeping disguise didn't work on. Glenn also wondered why he was chilling on the couch while everyone else was working. Lamel told him that all the instructors were working their asses off, and he was the only one who had to work with his head. Glenn noticed that Lamel was like 50 years old, and he never grew up. But he didn't care. He wondered if it was because of his youngest grandson. And he also gave out the information that Sylvia had already come about it, asking him to look after Rayon so he wouldn't hurt himself, and he didn't expect Glenn to come too. He noticed that Glenn had promised not to interfere with the training and learning process in the fifth hall, so if he had come to ask for Rayon, he might as well not waste his time. After all, Lamel makes no exceptions, not even for everyone's favorite junior. Glenn gladly agreed so he wouldn't do Rayon any favors. He emphasized that he didn't want his training to be easier, let him do as he wished, because he wasn't interested in weaklings. Lamel covered his mouth and realized that Glenn's love for his grandson is so great, it's hard to imagine, and he wants to give this child the love he couldn't give Sylvia. But Glenn answered his question by saying that if they weren't friends with Lamel, his head would have been rolling on the floor a long time ago. Emphasized that Lamel would stay tough and cut off the weaklings right away, mentoring only those who deserved it. And Lamel liked the idea. He agreed to act at his discretion. After that, Glenn left the fifth training room, and Lamel was very interested in what Rayon was like. At this time, Rayon was looking at the notification of receiving the third stage of the Ring of Fire, which gave him many advantages. It was easier for him because his mana sensitivity had increased, and his mind seemed much clearer than before. Thanks to Sylvia stopping him in time, he was able to progress more smoothly. And the status window helps to track the progress of all the training. But this is just the beginning. As the Sieghart family's training is known for its difficulty, obtaining the third step of the Ring of Fire is only the first step. A kind of solid foundation to continue to grow and develop actively. This way, he will be able to succeed faster than others and shut the mouths of all those who deserve it. And only then will he kill Tellus Robert. He won't rest until he's blown his head off. His thoughts were interrupted by Sylvia coming into the room. She wondered why he was awake and sat down on his bed. Rayon wondered why she was awake at this late hour. But she couldn't sleep, because Rayon had to go to the training hall tomorrow for training. She wanted to talk about it. She wanted to stop him, since Rayon never complained about anything, and even if he got hurt there, he wouldn't say a word to Sylvia. She wanted to postpone his training for at least another year, but she got a negative response from Rayon. He wasn't going to stand for anyone to start making comments about his family. He was sick of their disregard for Sylvia and the staff of the home he was living in. He couldn't stand it. He believed that if he performed well in training, they would stop treating him and Sylvia this way. Sylvia wasn't surprised that he was disappointed that they were separated and that people were saying mean things about them. She told him the story of how she fell in love with his father. It was pure chance. They met during one of the missions, but they couldn't be together because he was a simple knight. So she renounced her own energy core and mana and then left home. Rayon actually had an older sister. She was 2 years older and her name was Sia. They lived quietly and peacefully as a threesome until Eden's mercenaries attacked them. Rayon's father wasn't particularly strong, and Sylvia was pregnant with him at the time, but there was nothing they could do against them. Luckily, Glenn had secretly put guards on them, but they were hiding in the distance, so they didn't come to their aid right away. By then, Rayona's father and sister were already dead. She didn't know what to do, so she returned home, and from that moment on, she was treated like a sinner, and she really thought she deserved it. Rayon thought she was selfish. After all, she had abandoned her duties for love, but immediately came crawling back as she had been deprived of it. So it made sense to him why she was treated so coolly. And yet she is the woman who gave him life and motherly love, even if she is selfish to some. To him, she will always be the only mother for 2 lives at once. Raon asked if she regretted all this. Would she go back to those days before she ran away from her family? But Sylvia answered him with a slight smile on her face that she regretted nothing and would do it all over again. It was as if she was invisible in the family, and it was only when she left the family that she finally felt like a living and loved person. It was enough for her. She was so happy that she would do it all over again and would regret nothing. She also apologized to Raono for not treating them the way she wanted to be treated. But Raon answered her that everything was fine, so she had nothing to worry about. Raon's only thought was that no matter what Sylvia was called, she would always be his mom, because he had no other. He promised himself that he would get his revenge after he got back Sylvia's position in the family, and she only burst into tears at Raon's words that he would be fine. Late at night, Raon wasn't really sure why she started sobbing. Still, he calmed her down and put her to bed. He decided to practice the Ring of Fire and get some sleep since there wasn't much time left for training. He sat on his bed and practiced the Ring of Fire. When he opened his eyes, he noticed an unusual blue fire around him. At this moment, he was thinking about the Ring of Fire, and he wondered what it would be like at max pump. Once he realized that the blue fire around the room wasn't from him, he tensed up a bit. He heard a voice from that flame declare that his time had finally come, as it added that Rayon's rage had reached him and he had awakened. He was the second demon lord. He was ready to help make dreams come true. But seeing the child in front of him, he was puzzled, and Raon received a notification that he had been assigned the characteristic of Fury. He told Rayon to sacrifice his body and soul to him, but then he looked at him closely and realized that there was a child sitting in front of him. Rayon didn't realize what it was in front of him. This lord wanted to ask what was going on here. After all, the rage that had reached him could not belong to such a child. But looking deeper, he realized that it was definitely him. For there is indeed an all-consuming dark rage lurking within Rayonu. He had been circling Rayon and had already agreed to such terms. Again he offered him to give up his soul and body, and then he could exact the revenge he craved. It was clear to Rayon that this was all because of the rage he felt for Telus before his death. But it was a little late for that thing to show up. Raon told him that he didn't need any help. He could handle it himself. Rayon didn't want to use someone else's help and told it that he would defeat Telus himself. But the thing turned to him and told him he had misunderstood. He had not come to talk him down. Rising above him declared that the decision had already been made. Rayon felt the cold flames that the spirit emitted. The spirit threw itself at him, saying that all Rayon had to do was graciously present his body to it. Rayon didn't know how to resist it, and the spirit flew through him and froze many things in his room as well as Rayon himself. Rayon was so cold his body was instantly chilled, and his mind felt as if it was freezing. He realized that the attribute of this creature was not fire, but ice. The creature was trying to remind Rayon of his anger, so that all the rage he had would boil up in him. The creature also said that there was no one he could not handle. Even if he were a god, he would kill him. Rayon held on thanks to his resistance to water, but the attack was more than just cold. The creature continuously fueled the rage in Rayon's mind. It told him how it would chop his skull in half, eat his flesh. All it wanted in return was Rayon's body. But there was no telling what would happen to Sylvia and the maids if the creature succeeded in taking the body. Rayon couldn't afford to give up and take his body. The creature wouldn't stop talking, assuring him that he would feel much better when it gave in to his rage and took him. There was no point in holding back. It wanted to do no unnecessary damage so that it could use Rayon's body. But if he resisted, it would absorb his essence regardless of the consequences. Rayon was having a hard time. He had a feeling that his body was about to split into small pieces. He was already on the verge. He was having a hard time holding back. But one thought came to his mind that could save his life. He had resisted the cold for so long because of his resistance to the attribute of water. He had an idea to completely ward off his body and soul with the ring of fire. There was nothing left for him anymore. He wanted to survive. The creature was very surprised when Raon used the ring of fire. It didn't understand how a child could use such a technique since he was still so young. Rayon separated the creature from himself and said that he would take his revenge, and he would not let a ghost use his body. The creature was very angry, for he dared to call the Lord of the Demon World a ghost. And Rayon answered him, "How can he be the Lord of the Demon World if he can't even kill a child? It seems that the Lords of the Demon World are nothing of the sort. Since this creature said that he has only recently awakened, it means he won't be able to use his powers to the fullest." Rayon discovered an additional skill when he resisted this demon. The demon didn't understand how the child had status windows. Rayon answered him that this thing showed him characteristics in the form of stats. Rayon didn't understand how the window had anything to do with this demon. But the demon replied that he had created it himself, and also asked where Rayon had gotten it from. After asking what the system was for, the demon didn't want to answer his questions, and Rayon concluded that this system was for fast growth, and the demon became nervous. For how would a child know that? Rayon found it strange that the ring of fire was swinging much faster than in his previous life. He concluded that it was the system's effect on his skills. The demon was nervous and screamed like a little child. He wanted the power over his body and his system back, but he got himself a light attack from Rayon. The demon didn't understand what he was doing, and Rayon just hit him with a little mana. But he realized that the demon had no material form, so mana wouldn't help much. And with all the noise in his room, he concluded that he was the only one who could see and hear it. Demon was tired of being chased from corner to corner with mana. He pounced on the guy's arm and formed a bracelet on his arm. The demon spoke to the bracelet. He said that not much time had passed since his seal was broken, but his powers would soon return and then Rayon would be unstoppable. The demon said he would be with Rayon until the last day of his life. Rayon didn't like that, and wanted to get rid of him that very night. But he could lose the system that was helping him so well because of that. And who knows what could happen to Sylvia and Helen. He decided to keep him with him and keep an eye on him. He wants to contain him and hopefully get much stronger as soon as possible. Rayon asked why the flower bracelet and not something normal. The demon told him to respect his tastes. That was how they spent the night. The next day was important to Rayon. Helen reassured Sylvia that Ron would be fine. They saw Rayon, and you could see from Sylvia how worried she was about him. Rayon was coming down the stairs to go to the training room. Helen asked Rayon to be vigilant and take care of himself. He accepted what he was told. Helen wondered why Sylvia was seeing the young master off with such a sad face, for she might upset him. After these words, she sat down to her son and smilingly told him that she believed in him. He promised her that he would not overdo it and would immediately retreat as soon as it became difficult. After that, he went to the training facility. Sylvia wasn't sure that everything would be all right, but Helen assured him that it would be all right, because he was feeling much better. He could even stand the training. She knew he was much better than he had been in years, but this child was very precious to her. She began to remember Helen telling her that of all the Siegharts, Rayon's instructor was the most observant. and the young lord himself was trying hard, so she was sure that everything would work out. And Rayon, in turn, promised that he would be able to withstand everything and not get hurt. To make Sylvia less worried, he had made a promise, so he would keep it by all means. She was so worried about him that she begged him to come home in one piece. Rayon came to the Sieghart's 5th training room. Everyone was happy, chatting with each other. Rayon noticed that there were more people here than he expected. Not only Sieghart students, there were also students from vassal families and those who had been recommended. He remembered Helen's words that this year was especially crowded, so even the 6th hall would be connected. As he did, he also heard a discussion begin. The guys were talking and looking at him, saying that he would fall apart if you pushed him. They wondered why such a weakling had come here. They didn't forget to mention the bracelet on his arm, calling it tasteless. The demon didn't like it. The demon was ready to tear out their eyes and break their jaws. Rayon addressed them, mauling them instead of talking behind their backs like dung flies. "Why don't you speak your mind to their faces?" He called them pathetic for whispering behind others' backs. They objected, saying he doesn't belong to the main branch. How dare he reproach them? He also appealed to them, saying, "What right have they to judge him? It is only permissible to speak disparagingly of one who is lower in rank." One of the boys grabbed Rayon and was about to slap him in the face. Suddenly he saw the look in his eyes and stopped for a second. They were stopped by a member of the main branch. He said that there were a lot of people from the outside gathered here. They didn't want to dishonor the name of the Siegharts. The boys apologized to the representative, but he stared at Rayon and asked him why he was sticking his neck out on the first day. He told Rayon to know his place, because he was nothing more than dust. He also added that if he didn't want to fly off the outhouse, it would be best for him to lay low. It was pure luck that the head had paid attention to him, and he was already making a fool of himself. Such a loser will definitely fail in training. He advised him to quit training right away because he probably wouldn't be able to cope. Rayon listened to him and said, "Look how important you are." "Why are you so hateful? Is it because you're from the main branch? Or do you have other reasons for talking like that without knowing anything about me? Or did your father put you up to it? Go cry to him and let him punish the bad boy." He couldn't stand such insolence, though Raon spoke matter-of-factly. They were lucky that at that moment Lamel opened the door and interrupted them, asked what they were already fighting about, and if it had to do with the fact that they were still kids. Raon turned his attention to him and realized that this was the magnificent Lamel. He had not expected to see him here. He had heard earlier that Lamel had retired due to damage to the energy core. Lamel suggested that the guys hold off on fighting, at least until after the ceremony. The guy angrily turned around and left. Lamel welcomed everyone to the ceremony, introduced himself, and said he would be the instructor for the duration of the training. He had been told earlier that there were 160 recruits here, and he said that was too many for him. So he wants to do a little test to weed out the extra ones. He said he'd be happy with a quarter of the people here. He only wanted the best. Everyone got a little agitated and realized that they had to give the best results. The demon inside the bracelet began to rage, saying why he was looking down on them, saying he was going to cut off those elf ears. He said that his word was law here, so if anyone had a problem, they could complain to the head of the family. He motioned for them to start and asked what they were waiting for. "Run, march!" At first, they didn't understand what he was saying, but he added that the basis of martial arts is physical strength and fortitude. He told them to run as long as they could until he told them to stop. The demon didn't understand why Raon was running behind everyone, why he wouldn't break to the front and show everyone how to run. To which he replied that they are not at the competition, he has no reason to overtake everyone, because Lamel is trying to gauge the potential and temperament of his students, and won't judge by what the eyes see. After all, the winner will be the one who holds out until the very end, and Ron was prepared to hold out at any cost. Sir Boren and Lady Luna surged forward. Everyone was running pretty fast, but these two were even faster. And that wasn't the limit of their speed. The trainers were sure that those two could run non-stop for a couple more hours. They're only 12 years old and they're already at this level. It's scary to imagine what they will achieve in the future. The coaches also took notice of Ron. They noticed that he was obviously not running fast enough. He was lagging behind at the time. They whispered that he was sick and that he was running amazingly well. You could tell he was tired. They thought he would fall off his feet in the next few minutes. Lamel also focused on Rayon, and he became very curious. After all, he had never seen anything like it before. He always knew that people whose talents he didn't see immediately would become the strongest on the continent. It was not given to him to look into the depths of their strength. The fates of most of the children he saw right away, but Rayon's destiny he could not determine. It was hidden to him. Rayon was clearly stronger than Lamel, so he was beyond his vision. The fleeing boys looked at Rayon and talked about how he was making such a fool of himself, but he was tailing off. They were sure he'd be eliminated and wouldn't last 10 minutes. Rayon had an interesting thought. They were just running after all, even though they were promised a hell of a workout. In his previous life, he had to run headlong from enemies and idiotic beasts, but this was just running. Thought it was too easy to fail this training session. The training continued as they ran as fast as they could. Lamel paid attention to Rayon, who was running behind them. He didn't think he could run that long. He thought he should have been exhausted long ago. After all, Rayon had long ago exhausted his stamina and was running beyond his limits. He should have had no strength left, but he continued to do the impossible. Lamel thought about how this guy moves on pure persistence and is willing to train until it kills him. He piqued Lamel's interest, and he decided to observe him more actively. Boren saw Rayon keeping up with him and couldn't believe he was still running. After all, he had information that Rayon was too weak to train. He remembered how his father had been told that Rayon was very weak, and it would be a miracle if he survived. Not to mention the training, it would surely kill him. Boren knew all of this, but then how is Rayon still standing on his feet? This really pissed him off, and he decided to show him how to run. Activating his aura, he thought that now he would show Rayon the difference between himself and him. Now he would definitely not catch up to Boren. So he ran as fast as he could. Rayon saw this and didn't understand him. Boren seems like a nobleman, but in reality he's just a child. Even Luna is more mature than Boren. But no matter how you look at it, this test is not a competition but a battle of attrition. There was no reason for him to break ahead. Boren is just still a kid. As time went on, they ran like this without stopping. Many guys had long since exhausted and gave up to get some rest at least. They looked enviously at Rayon as he ran without stopping and could not believe that someone like him could run for so long. They tried to understand how he never got tired. But at this moment, Rayon felt as if he was about to die because of the cold energy inside him. He felt like his lungs and heart would fail at any moment. He used the ring of fire to squeeze out the remaining energy from his body. Due to the fact that the ring of fire had advanced a lot recently, if he used its full power, the positive effects wouldn't be long in coming. The demon turned to him, for it looked pathetic in his opinion. He understood Rayon's condition and was ashamed of his future vessel. The demon began to urge Rayon to give up his body, and he would deal with Boren. Rayon would have a hard time restraining this demon at this very moment, as he was exhausted and very weak. There was no way the demon would calm down and promised to freeze the whole place down. Rayon was having a hard time putting up with all of this, as rage took over his mind. He pretended that nothing was happening and held back all the pain he was feeling. He told the demon to be calm because it would not work on him. But the demon didn't agree with him because he was sure that no man could withstand his anger. The demon continued to watch with satisfaction to see how long the kid would last. Rayon had to hold on no matter what, for if he showed any weakness, the demon would take over his body. He was pissed off because our hero was so determined and indestructible. He didn't understand why his rage wasn't working on Rayon. Our hero was so tired that his body stopped obeying him. He felt pain similar to post-mortem pain. His vision flickered and his eyes began to darken. His breathing had long since been knocked out, and it was extremely difficult for him to breathe. He had resigned himself to the fact that this was his limit, and he clearly couldn't take much more. But at that moment, Lamel decided to stop all the participants, and they fell to the ground to rest for a bit. Boren could not accept the fact that Rayon had made it to the end of the trial, even though no one believed in him. Rayon was catching his breath, and realized that he would have died in a few more minutes. He had resigned himself to the fact that in this life he would not be able to rest. Lena was just as surprised as everyone else. The demon called Rayon a monster for his endurance, for even he didn't believe in Rayon, even though the latter had warned him that it wouldn't work. This running beyond his limits had helped him pump up his ring of fire very well, and now he had improved his physical potential. They looked at the updated stats. Because Raon had surpassed his physical capabilities, he had his physical stats increased and became stronger. The demon raged about Rayon getting extra points just because of being in his system. But Rayon didn't have anything to answer the demon after all. The system helps you pump faster than normal people do. Lamel praised the participants and informed them that the test was over. He also added that everything he had said earlier about a quarter of the participants he wanted to select was a lie. Everyone freaked out because they were running around like crazy for this test. Lamel told them that he wouldn't be able to expel so many people on the first day, but that only applied to today. Just like that, he also added that if they showed the same results, most of them would definitely be expelled. Immediately, they all tensed up and fell silent. He continued to talk to them and told them that he was sure that they would run at the limit of their abilities, but none of the 160 people did not fulfill this condition, except for one person. He noticed the way Boren used his aura even though it wasn't allowed, but he didn't care what they did to pass the test after all. They were just passing the test. Prompted that now they should do everything as he said, then they wouldn't fail, no matter what they thought it would be so easy. For now, they are all considered probationary students. In 6 months, there will be a final test. Then Lamel will look at their abilities. He said he's going to keep only the best students, even though he's not the one doing the ranking. After this test, they went to the comfortable dormitories and there would be a training center nearby. After that, we were transported to the forest where Lamel and Glenn were. They were going to meet there. Lamel greeted Glenn and Glenn asked how the training was going. Lamel commented that why would he ask that? Glenn was there and could see for himself. He noted that Boren and Luna are very talented freshmen, and the other children had the potential to be a pillar for the family. However, he failed to consider anything in Rayon. Lamel was sure that he was completely exhausted, so how on earth he had managed to run so much was beyond his comprehension. For the first time since Lamel had met Glenn, he couldn't see anything in him. Since Limel's core damage, his life had become much more boring. But Glenn noticed that the man himself had asked to be his instructor for the newcomers. Glenn told Lamel to stay focused and concentrate on his duties, and Lamel agreed. Lamel realized that there were students this year who deserved the most attention. But Glenn believed that it was just a coincidence, and he obviously couldn't become a martial arts master. But Lamel realized that this was no coincidence at all. Rayon, after training, decided to go to the training center. Demon was not clear how he could go to the training center after training. It felt like this guy had no breaks. The guys looked at Rayon with envy because they wanted to achieve the same results, given that he was sick. Toward evening, the guys gathered and started to discuss Rayon. They couldn't believe that he had managed to survive the first training session. They were sure he had cheated because everyone knew he was sick. Crane was also with them. He was convinced that Rayon had used some sort of remedy. He'd heard that a saint in rags had personally mixed it for him, and he'd probably used it to pass the test. Now these guys were sure that it was the medicine that made him run for so long. They concluded that they needed to teach Rayon a lesson and went to look for him in the forest. When they found him, Crane pushed him as hard as he could. Rayon wasn't clear why they would fight him and asked straight up. Crane said to him, "Still asking?" And the guys behind him shouted that he had used a magic tool to pass the test, and that's why he was so confident in the test. They accused him of taking the remedy from a saint in rags, and if it hadn't been for that, he wouldn't have run a minute. Ryonu was shocked that the guys were freaking out over something so stupid. The guys were ready to teach him a lesson, a private lesson, so to speak. Saying that it was a common practice, nothing personal, they were readying their fists to start beating him up. Crane swung around and quoted the teacher, "Teaching is light." The demon couldn't settle down. He didn't understand why Rayon listened to these guys yapping and wouldn't put them in their place. He was ashamed that he was a future vessel for the demon. But Rayon hit Crane so hard that he surprised himself without expecting it. The guys were shocked at what they saw. Crane had been punched right in the face, and he couldn't do anything in response. Even the demon couldn't believe his eyes. Rayon told them that since they wanted to learn, Now let them muck it out. Taking his hand in his own, he could feel how easy it was for him to fight against these guys. He was scattering them and destroying them mentally and physically. The last guy who wasn't hurt couldn't have thought it would come out this way. He wondered what his friends were doing, since they weren't supposed to lose to someone like him. But before he could say anything, he was immediately punched in the face by Rayon. Rayon continued to beat these guys up, and the demon was having such a good time watching him beat the crap out of them. They were exhausted and completely beaten, and Rayon didn't have a scratch on him. Crane was on his knees, apologizing to him, saying they were wrong. He begged him to stop. Our hero stepped on Crane's arm and turned to him. If he wants the lesson to be over, let him answer correctly to the one question posed. Rayon asked if it was Borin who prompted him to do this to him. But Crane answered honestly that they wanted to do it themselves, and Borin knows nothing about it. Rayon thought Borin hated him, but now all was definitely not lost. So he also suggested that Crane keep the contents of this lesson a secret, and he gladly agreed, just as long as he didn't get punched in the face again. Rayon took him by his long hair and brought him up to his face, saying that they had better stay away from him or they would have extra lessons waiting for them. The last lesson he taught Crane was that if he touched the shadow one more time, he would disappear forever. Since they got the message very quickly, they ran as fast as they could away from him. Lemel was watching, and he noticed that Raon looked a lot like Glenn as a child. He also noticed that he was gifted in martial arts, but that was no surprise. He was a Sieghart, a talent growing in the shadows, hidden among gifted children. After that, Rayon went to his room. He received a notification that his dexterity had been increased by 1. The demon was really pissed off that Rayon got bonus points and didn't even realize why he got them, even though he had created this system himself. The demon didn't understand anything, as he had never had the system taken away from him before. Accusing Rayon of stealing the power meant for the original demon form, and not even the slightest bit grateful to the demon. Although he was very angry with Raon, he offered him a proposition. The demon decided to bet with him, saying that if he won, the demon would give him a bonus, and if he lost, he would stop resisting Fury. Rayon received a notification that Fury was offering a wager. If he passes the practice test with the best score, he will get plus 2 points to all stats and 1 characteristic of his choice. And if he loses the bet, he will receive a 10-point Fury penalty. Raon asked Yaroth if she was referring to the test that teacher Lemel had mentioned. She replied that that was what the bet was about. He asked what the characteristic of choice was, and Fury explained that he would get one of the characteristics that Fury possessed, and the level would be reduced. Likewise, Rayon asked what the Fury penalty meant, and the Fury told him that he would succumb to the emotions of the Fury and be a little more in the power of that demon. It's not much at all, but it should be enough for the demon to do so, emphasizing the fact that he would no longer be able to control himself so well. Raon understood what this demon was trying to accomplish. He didn't think Fury was lying to him. After all, he had always answered all of his questions honestly. These victory bonuses were so attractive, even though it would be hard for an ordinary person to get into the top list. But our hero is not an ordinary person. He is a reborn. Although it was risky, but our hero decided to agree to the bet. The demon only smiled widely and told him that it was a wise choice on his part. Since he had accepted the terms of the bet, he now needed to train much harder to get the bonuses and become the best at the test. The next morning, the guys practiced and were already very tired. Some of them were already lying on the floor from extreme fatigue. It was hard for them to do the training, for their legs had not yet recovered from yesterday's jogging test. Lemel made everyone adopt the horseman's pose and stand in it for a long time. Calling it the foundation of the martial arts course, emphasized that everyone should learn to endure it, told them to stand in this stance until he allowed them to relax, and he himself lay down for a nap. He also added that he was not forcing anyone. The test was theirs to take, not his. Some guys freaked out because he wanted to learn how to sword fight. Others didn't like that all they did was run around and stand in stupid poses. Borin decided to take his like-minded friends with him and go sword training themselves, because he was sure that if they stopped practicing sword fighting, they would lose the skills they had already learned. The demon saw the boys leaving to practice sword training. He suggested Raon to go with them, to learn sword skills. But Raon had no need to learn fighting techniques, for he needed to strengthen his body with basic training first. At this stage, he didn't need a sword. He needed to develop basic physical strength and endurance. His body weaker than the others because of the frost curse, the basics were most important to him, both for growth and training. He had no place to rush. He decided to focus on training his body, but he was already being watched. Luna focused on him. She noticed that he was getting stronger rather quickly, lifting much more weight than yesterday. She had heard about his illness, but she couldn't understand how he was increasing the weight of the projectile every day. It's normal for a person to get stronger, but it's almost unrealistic to increase the weight of the projectile every time. And Raon is already managing to lift 10 pounds more than he did at the beginning of the week. She didn't understand how he could do it. How can he be so resilient while suffering from an illness? She walked into his gym and realized there was definitely something about him. Raon saw her in front of him and asked, "Luna Slyan, did you want something?" But she didn't say a word to him, and they stared at each other in silence. Her thoughts were occupied with how fast he was progressing. But then she realized that she was standing right in front of him and looking at him in pitch-black silence. She was slightly embarrassed and decided to just sit down next to him as if nothing was happening. She then picked up the barbell and started practicing, but as soon as Rayon went anywhere, she would follow him. She repeated all the exercises after him. She also smelled a special odor when she was with Rayon, a cool and pleasant fragrance. After that odor, her body felt much lighter. Thanks to that scent and Rayon, she started lifting much more weight than usual. Rayon wondered why she was following him around and not saying anything. So he asked directly if she had anything to say to him, to which she replied, "No." But more and more questions were arising for Rayon. Luna realized that he was something special and decided to observe him some more. The guys who entered the training room were surprised that Luna was with Rayon and couldn't understand why she was following a guy like him. What was so special about him, after all? He was deprived of belonging to the main branch of the family. Borin picked up the wooden sword and told his boys that Rayon's methods are a total waste because the endless strength exercises are of no use. Rayon is weak, so this kind of training is necessary, but even if he gets stronger, he will still never be on par with them. He didn't know what Limmel had in store for them on the test, but he was sure that if he was to pass it, he would have to learn swordsmanship. It would at least help with self-defense. He didn't care about this side branch outcast. The test results would show everything. Late at night, they were still practicing when one of the boys approached Rayon, calling him Ser Raon. It was a recommendation student named Dorian. He asked them for permission to work out with them, to show them how to do the exercise properly. Rayon didn't mind Dorian practicing with them. Dorian decided to give Rayon a treat for the opportunity, by giving him a cookie as a token of his appreciation. Rayon looked at the cookie and said that he didn't seem to want the cookie very much, but his eyes fell on Luna, who was looking at the cookie as mesmerized as if she hadn't eaten in days. He felt uneasy as she kept her eyes on the cookie. Not even paying attention to the way Rayon was looking at her, he decided not to give the cookie back to Dorian. He gave it to Luna, and she was happily eating the cookie with gusto. Rayon thought at that moment, "What a marvelous judo." After that, they helped Dorian pump his strength skills with them. And so it went from day to day. The days flew by, everyday training, running, and so on. Training together was much easier for them. Months passed. Rayon had more and more worn-out shoes, and Borin practiced sword training more and more. 6 months went by. Rayon was running at a breakneck pace, as if his life depended on it. The backs of the guys running ahead of him on the first day's test no longer blocked his view. After the hard and exhausting work, there were only 2 left in front of him. Time went on, and then the day of the test arrived. A lot of people came to this test to see the winner. It was very noisy. Everyone was asked to take their seats. Sylvia and Helen arrived to see Rayon. Borin's father looked at all the students carefully. The demon at this moment was reminding Rayon about their bet, and remarked that it would be hard for him to overtake Borin and Luna, so he had to prepare to give in to the rage. Rayon waved the demon away. After all, no one knows the conditions of the test yet, much less the results. Afterward, he noticed Dorian lying on the floor, and you could see by him how worried he was about today's test. He said he couldn't sleep last night because of the worry, calling himself a wuss. He didn't know how he was going to cope. Luna turned to Rayon and offered him a cookie, the same one Dorian had given him earlier. But Rayon refused the cookies. He looked at Borin, because he was the best student. And then he thought about his surroundings and wondered why those weirdos wouldn't get off my back. Sylvia and Helen watched Rayon, noticing that he stood proudly and confidently, and that he had endured 6 months of grueling training. They also noticed that he had made friends, but they weren't surprised since he was a friendly kid. He had been sensitive since he was a baby and had never even been cranky once, and he had already made friends. Sylvia was proud of him. "Greet the head of the family," shouted one of the instructors. Glenn walked silently into the training center. Everyone was a little shocked because he had not attended such events before. Glenn sat down in his chair and the instructors bowed to him. Lamel was also confused as to why Glenn had come, but the man answered him that the future of the family depends on these children. "Why not observe? Or are you not happy with me?" Glenn asked. Lemel replied that he was always welcome here, since the head of the family honored them with his presence. There is no way to delay, and they will start the test right away. He briefly began to explain the details of the test. A green aura pierced through the students, and they were a bit shocked, not realizing what they would have to do. Rayon shielded himself from such a gust of aura, looking at Lemel while he explained the rules. They would have to break through his aura, such a condition to pass the test. Lemel emitted his aura and told them that the aura was an integral part of a martial artist. A test would be used to determine if they were worthy of becoming a martial artist. There were already complaints from the audience. The person did not understand, after all, the children had not studied the aura, why it was on the test. And others were also outraged by this question because some children have not even started practicing with aura, so not fair. They also noticed that Lamel was sleeping while practicing. He sighed heavily and began to explain to them that aura is not a muscle. It's a raw component that comes from the power of a master spirit. It is the spirit that proves that you are a martial artist. The aura is only secondary. The audience was further outraged before they were interrupted by Glenn. He told them that even if you haven't trained to control your aura, every person has a will that they respond to. Lamel was already glad of Glenn's presence. He had explained everything clearly and concisely, and he certainly wouldn't be interrupted. Glenn added that this test could be passed on fortitude alone, and Lamel agreed. And since there were no further objections, Lamel proceeded with the test. Luna was first, and everyone else was asked to stand back. He began to explain the rules of the test. He would be using an aura surge that she would have to endure. If she put in the effort in training, then it wouldn't be too hard to handle. She needs to break through the aura and touch Lamel, and then the test will be over. He began to emit his aura. Luna felt the aura and then covered herself with her hands to shield herself from it. He warned her that it was forbidden to strengthen her aura on purpose. Let her use the willpower she had to train until that day. Though it was hard, she tried to make her way towards Lemel even though her legs were shaking. She struggled to get through to Lamel and finally touched his hand. Putting his hand on Luna's head, Lamel said that she had made it. He advised her to keep up the good work. Afterwards, he called Dorian. He didn't expect to be second and was very embarrassed. As he missed Luna, saw how tired she was, and he became even more uncomfortable. Lemel said to do everything the same way Luna did, get through the aura surge using only his willpower. Dorian wasn't sure if that would work since he was a rather weak-willed man, but Lamel told him that if he didn't do it, he wouldn't pass the selection process. Dorian sensed this aura and crouched down and began to move forward. Rayon watched carefully and noticed that the intensity of his aura bursts varied from examiner to examiner. Lamel monitors the aura, taking into account the child's level and his progress in training. Most likely he was really watching every single one of them. Dorian still went to Lamel and praised him, although Dorian's self-esteem was too low. He was actually a capable kid. He was advised to believe in himself more, even though he was not comfortable with himself, but he got through it. And so the exam went on until it was Borin Sieghart's turn. He said he would start right away, and he used his aura. Borin shielded himself from its power. He didn't think it wouldn't be that easy. He didn't think everyone could get through something like this. It looked much easier to him from the outside, and he wondered how Luna got through it. He sat down, and it was hard for him to move from his seat. Even though his talent was special, he was gifted with it. It was still hard for him, even though even out of 160 students, only a couple of them could compete with him. Lamel continued to talk about how he and his minions had wasted time. What's the point of practicing fencing if you don't control the process by willpower? You're supposed to be strengthening your physical and mental components instead of playing with a sword. Every time he got hard, he used his aura. But that wouldn't fly here. Boren began to remember his father's remarks on his brother. On the day of his exile, it was a hard and cold look, and so Boren had no chance to give up. He took his will in his fist and lashed out at Limel. Moving from his seat, he still reached Limmel and passed the test. Limmel told Boren that he was only 12, that he should stop acting like an adult and practice what he was told. "If you look up all the time, you will stumble one day. Remember these words," Limmel said. Limmel shifted his gaze to the last student. It was Rayon, and invited him to come forward. Rayon came out and stood in front of him, waiting for the test to begin. He asked if he was ready and immediately received Rayon's clear answer. He was ready. "Let's begin then." Applying her aura, she walked through Rayon. Lamel used much stronger than before. The audience even felt it. Sylvia and Helen got nervous for Rayon. Glenn felt this incredible aura surge. Ron stood proudly and looked at Limmel. He didn't think that this was his test. After all, it wasn't very strong. Limmel stated that he is not worse than Boren or Luna. Let him try to stand in front of such an aura. Rayon covered his face a little and remembered that what matters here is the strength of his spirit, not his body. And his spirit was not only formed by Rayon Sieghart, but also Rayon the Assassin, and boldly went to Limmel. It was not clear to Limmel how he could withstand such a strong aura pressure. Glenn also sat and watched Raon advance towards Lamel. Lamel had thoughts that how is this even possible? There was no way this could happen. But Rayon walked quickly and easily despite the effects of the aura on him. There was dead silence on the training ground. Glenn and Lamel watched in silence as Rayon easily made good with this building. Rayon broke that dead silence by asking if he passed the test. The participants stood and stared at Rayon as they couldn't understand how he was able to pass through such a strong aura. They thought it was nonsense. Boren's father didn't think he could because, according to his information, he couldn't even survive the training. Lamel froze and only thought about how a sick child who couldn't even use his aura could pass this test. He turned to Rayon and asked, "Who are you?" Rayon answered him that they have been Zamoma for like 6 months now. Limmel asked because what he had created was impossible. After all, he had created an aura blast that should have been beyond Rayon's level. He wanted to tease him because with his level, there was no way he could overcome it. Rayon looked at him silently, and Lamel realized that they had been standing like that for too long, and it was time to announce the results. Saying that he had gotten carried away, he announced to everyone that Rayon Sieghart was the last test subject for the day. The test was over, and now he was ready to announce the top pledge. And so the top student of the 5th training hall is Rayon Sieghart. Please welcome the winner. Sylvia couldn't hold back her tears and couldn't believe her son was the best student. Helen was just as excited because their young Mr. Rayon had made it. But the spectators were disturbed by the way the test went. They didn't understand how Rayon could be chosen as the best if he only made it through the aura blast. Especially how it was possible to rate him above young Master Boren. Boren didn't wait long, voicing his protest. He didn't believe Rayon was better than him and called the results of the test unfair. Lamel didn't understand why it would be unfair. But Boren did not calm down and expressed his displeasure, for he was sure that Rayon's stamina, strength, and intelligence were clearly inferior to his level. He couldn't recognize someone like that as the best student. Boren was fully convinced that Rayon had cheated somehow. The audience supported Boren, for the ego version sounded likely. They began to rage, because they believed that Rayon was incapable of anything, since he had a disease and didn't even have an aura. Considering all the rumors that were going around Rayon, it sounded plausible. Boren introduced himself as a martial arts master of the Sieghart family and stated, in his opinion, the best student should be determined through a duel, not a stupid test. Lamel only smiled at Boren's statement, and asked Boren, so you don't like the results of the test? Do you want to be the best? And Boren at this point began to recant. But since the exam was already over, Liemel decided to ask Glenn what he thought was the best thing for them to do. Glenn thought for a moment and said, "Rayon Sieghart, it seems that the crowd is not happy with your result. Do you want to fight Boren for the title of best?" Boren was already excited for the fight. But Raon refused, saying the test was over and the results were obvious. Why would he get into a fight if it was worthless? Turning to Boren, he remembered his words as he said that the honor of the main branch was what mattered. "Accepting defeat with honor is something you should be able to do as well, Boren." Boren was ashamed, and he already wanted to smear Rayon. Glenn decided to make a decision and said that this was what they would do now. There will be a reward for the top student's place. He will give a bronze emblem to the winner. As soon as Rayon heard about the bronze emblem, he remembered what they meant. Gold, silver, and bronze emblems are given to those who are able to accomplish something. The rewards one can receive depend on the material of the emblem. Even though this one was bronze, it was from the head of the family himself. He was sure that he could get valuable items for it. He also realized that no one here was happy that he was ranked first in the rankings, so he decided to agree to the duel. Glenn ordered the duel to begin immediately. Now the true top student will be determined. Everything will be decided in one round. If you use aura or weapons, you will be disqualified immediately. Use only your own strength. Liemel explained the rules and ordered them to start the battle. With a wave of Liemel's hand, Boren immediately attacked Rayon. Rayon was able to dodge Boren's attacks, but he didn't stop and kept attacking, not letting Rayon rest. But our hero either dodged or blocked his blow. Boren used the Fist of the Righteous Tiger attack, which is his father's technique. Since it wasn't forbidden to use fist-fighting techniques, he wasn't cheating. After hitting Rayon's block, the latter was knocked back a bit. The crowd was discussing their fight. They were in favor of Boren, thinking Rayon definitely didn't stand a chance. Boren was all furious. He thought he was trash from the sideline. He was sure that Rayon was definitely weaker than him. Boren would never give up his place as the best apprentice. Remembering the times his father had banished his brother because he was a weakling, he declared that weaklings were not needed in the family. Boren couldn't disappoint his father, for the same fate could have been waiting for him. He wanted to prove himself for his father. As he continued to strike, he didn't want someone like Rayon to be able to overtake him. But our hero dodged all the attacks and kept at it. He noticed he could see everything. He can see his fist. He can see the trajectory of his swing. Rayon could clearly see all his attacks. And then Boren threw another punch, telling him to give up. He had no chance. But now Rayon was ready to land his first blow of the fight. Ron clenched his fist, swung around, and struck back. Their fists met on a one-to-one path. With a blow, he threw Boren's arm away so that it would not prevent him from striking again. Boren didn't realize what was happening or how his attack called Fist of the Righteous Tiger could be dispelled. And here it was Rayon Sieghart's final attack, his fist glowing like Boren's, only with golden energy. After hitting Boren, he knocked him back, thus ending the fight. Boren didn't even have time to block Rayon's attack, but even a block wouldn't have helped, as the punch was much stronger and faster than his. Boren's father was very surprised, because it was their family's technique and could not have gotten to anyone else. The people in the hall could not believe their eyes. Glenn held his breath and didn't understand how Rayon managed to use the Righteous Tiger Fist attack. He was sure that Rayon didn't know this technique. Boren struggled to get up after such a blow and asked Rayon how he was able to use the Righteous Tiger Fist, to which Rayon replied that he had shown him the technique and he had only had to repeat it after him. The spectators in the audience were looking at all this, and they had questions. How he was able to use this technique, because it was impossible. They thought that Raon was secretly studying the technique, otherwise he couldn't have used it. They still couldn't believe what had happened. Liemel looked at them and realized that the guy was definitely not a bad guy. First, he reflected the righteous fist of the tiger Boren, twisting the energy in a different direction. The very ability to see the mana flow of other masters already makes you outstanding. And he also used the flow to replicate the technique himself. That kind of talent could make a person the most powerful in the continent. It's the talent the Siegharts have been waiting for. The heavens themselves have gifted him with such powers. Lamel walked up to them and declared that they now had a winner, and now it is an unconditional victory in front of witnesses. Victory for Rayonic Sieghart. This concludes the test. After these words, the parents of the contestants ran out into the stadium to join them, Sylvia being one of the first to do so. She ran up to Rayon and hugged him as hard as she could, because she hadn't seen him for a long time and had missed him all this time. Rayon was equally happy to see Sylvia. Everyone was happy for their children and hugged them. A servant helped to let Boren down, and he felt a look on his face. Looking away, he saw his father, who first looked at him and then just left, because he expected much more from his son. Boren was disappointed with his results, and was already imagining the upcoming conversation at home. In the evening, Boren came to his father's study. There was dead silence in the study. The father turned to his son and asked him if he remembered what his father had told him. Boren remembered everything and immediately replied that his father had told him to be the best student and not to dare to lose to anyone. His father turned around to him and replied, "Yes, I didn't ask for much, I think. Just to defeat the unfortunate Rayon and humiliate them even more, to take the place of the best student. And you lost to the son of a bug who lost his right to be a member of the main branch? You decided to trample on our honor right in front of everyone? Do you want to end up like your brother?" Boren tried to justify himself, but his father wouldn't let him say a word. His father told him that he had already missed the first opportunity to become the best, but he was lucky that the best student would be chosen again at the end of the first semester. He ordered him to become one without fail, after which he ordered him to get out of his office. Boren was walking and remembered his father's words that he should not miss his last chance and become the best. It made him very angry because he couldn't accept the fact that he had lost. He blamed Ron for everything that happened. He thought he was the cause of all the problems. He didn't understand why things happened the way they did because he had worked hard to achieve his goals. He had been walking and thinking about his failures for so long that he reached the training hall. At first, he didn't understand how he got here, but afterwards he realized that his feet had just led him here out of habit. Once inside the room, he looked around. It was so empty he figured it was because the test was over today and everyone had gone home. Picking up the dumbbells, he could directly feel all the months it had taken him to train. Then he noticed the lockers in the distance, and especially Rayon's locker. He decided to go over and take a look. There was nothing illegal about just looking, but he didn't think he would be so surprised by what he saw. He saw a lot of shoes that were worn out. There were at least 10 pairs of shoes in that box. Boren didn't believe at first that Raon had been able to wear so many in 6 months of training. After all, he had changed his pair of shoes barely twice in the same amount of time. Turning back around, he imagined Rayon had been practicing all this time. All that grueling training without rest, day and night. Come to think of it, he really had been training hard. All the while, Boren had been making a big deal of himself by waving his sword around and neglecting basic training. While he was resting in his bedroom, Rayon was practicing in his sweat. Such is the true path of strength for Sieghart. Boren considered himself led astray. As he looked around the empty hall, he realized he had to take matters into his own hands. He put his shoes back on and left the training facility. At that moment, Boren's mindset changed, and he realized what path awaited him and what achievements he needed to make in his life. That same night, the ice demon resented Rayon. He introduced himself as the king of essence who had lived for hundreds of years but had never met someone like Rayon. The demon asked him what he was, but Rayon told him let him imagine all he wanted, he didn't care. Rayon was busy considering the deal he'd won, when he got a new characteristic called Snowflower Perception. The demon told him that he had gotten a good characteristic, though he certainly didn't deserve it. He then began to explain to Rayon what this ability is. It increases his sensitivity. Even though it's a 1-star ability now, it will only work at 10% until he pumps it up. The demon explained that the Essence King's senses help him sense something 10 times faster than his normal senses would allow. Raon listened to him and concluded that the ability was indeed a good one. He was only confused by the name and decided to ask the demon why it was called that. As he left the room, Raon noticed that the demon was not very good with names. One was worse than the other. The demon was outraged and said that since he was so clever, he could come up with his own. In the morning, Rayon and Sylvia's conversation was interrupted by Glenn's subordinate, who informed Rayon that the head of the house was calling for him. Sylvia was nervous, thinking he had done something wrong. But the subordinate reassured her, saying that everything was fine. There was nothing to worry about. The head of the house wanted to personally reward Rayon with a bronze badge. Rayon came to him and greeted him. Even though Glenn didn't like it, he had to keep his promise. The subordinate held up the bronze token to Rayon. Glenn awarded it to him. As promised, he took it in his hands. Glenn went on to say that in the future, when you want it back, you can request any item according to the rank of the token. Rayon considered the token and decided to ask for something right away. He asked for his mother, for Sylvia Sieghart. He asked the head of the house what he should do to restore his mother to her former position in the family. Glenn didn't think that's what Rayon would ask. Re-asked him if he was referring to her belonging to the direct lineage. Rayon confirmed that that was what Glenn had understood, and realized that Glenn had softened a bit after that question, wondered why that was. Glenn answered him that an achievement was needed. That would be possible after making an achievement that the whole house would recognize, but it's not as easy as it seems. To please everyone at once is like trying to get a star from the sky. Almost impossible, especially for someone like you, Glenn emphasized. Smiling, Rayon replied to him that he didn't say it wasn't possible. Putting the award back, he thanked the head of the house for the award. Turning around, he walked towards the exit. Glenn stopped him, for Rayon had not asked for the reward, only asked a question that he would have answered anyway without the token. He didn't think the destructive king of the north would say something like that. Glenn asked to voice a wish. Ron already knew what to ask for, after all. He had been thinking about it for a long time. He asked for cultivation techniques, but the head of the house objected to him, as this was something that the trainers would teach them after they started basic training. But Rayon didn't back down and said that he wanted an aura cultivation technique much better than what they were taught in basic training. Asked to learn a cultivation technique that matched the bronze rank token. After all, the shadow cultivation technique from his past life wasn't enough. In order to recover Sylvia's position and cut off Deluce's head, a flawlessly strong aura is needed. Glenn realized that the kid was interested in cultivation techniques. With a snap of his fingers, a gate opened in front of Rayon. There were so many books, Rayon looked at those racks of books and couldn't see the end of them. There were thousands of books on the racks. These were some of the Sieghart's bookcases. Glenn told him that if he put his hand to the center of the shelving unit, the book you needed most would immediately appear. Ron listened to him and was ready to get his book. Reaching his hand up, all he asked was that it would be a better shadow cultivation technique. He hoped that something useful would appear. And so one old book was pulled from the top shelves. The book opened and quickly flipped through the pages, getting closer and closer to Rayon. Rayon, through the bright light, saw this book. It was very old and worn. Glenn and his subordinate looked on in surprise, for this book had stood unattended for a very long time. Glenn asked, "What is it? How did you get this book?" But Rayon looked at it without taking his eyes off her. It was as if he was fascinated by her. It was the 10,000 Lights cultivation book. He flipped through the pages and didn't understand what kind of technique it was. Absorbing all the information, he received this technique and all its benefits. After that, the book started throwing out all the sheets in different directions. Rayon felt himself absorbing this book and all its knowledge. Glenn watched this spectacle and began to remember one of the servants asking how far away Sylvia was from their house. But then Glenn was only interested in the height of the house and nothing else. The servant reported that Sylvia had gotten close to another man and had left the house. But Glenn asked him not to report such trivialities. After the days passed when he only thought about the house, leaving emotions for later, he was able to gain a military strength that surpassed the demonic wall. He obtained a huge expansion of the house, but at a great cost. When it was reported to him that his adopted son and granddaughter were attacked, the attackers were ghosts, twin Eden twins that Lady Sylvia had previously dealt with. She herself was fine, but the other two were dead. Due to the sudden attack, it was no longer possible to save them. Glenn couldn't accept this fact, couldn't accept what had happened. After that, he regained his emotions, but nothing can bring back the past. So even if Rayon and Sylvia hate him, this time he will protect them at all costs. Rayon almost devoured the book. He felt this effect he was experiencing, his body and mind. Something seemed to flow into them. But this feeling was interrupted by Glenn, who addressed him by first and last name. Raon looked at Glenn and didn't know what to say to him. Glenn asked what he had just done, to which our hero replied to him that he didn't know what had just happened. He only remembers that the cultivation technique disappeared in his hands. Glenn asked what the name of the book was. Rayon raised his hand and stared into it. Pronounced that the book was called 10,000 Lights Cultivation. A notice appeared in front of him about learning this cultivation and mastering the flames of infinity. Glenn questioned, for he had heard Rayon say that he had memorized the entire contents of the book. Rayon confirmed what he had said. Glenn accepted that fact and remarked that it was pretty good. Said the awarding was over and he could leave. As he left, Rayon could feel the technique in his veins. The subordinate asked if the technique Rayon absorbed was the same. Glenn interrupted him and confirmed that it was the same technique. It was an ancient cultivation technique wielded by the first patriarch Zygarde. After him, no one in the history of the house had ever been able to obtain or read it. Who would have thought that it would succumb to Rayon? The subordinate remarked that if word got out, both Raon and Lady Sylvia might be in danger. Glenn reassured him that no one knew about the technique. The book had disappeared because it had been learned, which is what happens with learned books. No one could have learned the book anyway, so if it wasn't for Rayon, it would have just rotted away on the shelves. In Glenn's opinion, things are going to change a bit now. Rayon didn't understand why such a powerful cultivation technique had gotten to him and how Glenn had allowed it. After all, for such a technique, not only would a silver token, a gold token wouldn't be enough. This technique isn't inferior to the legendary Ring of Fire, so learning it won't be a waste for our hero. Starting to meditate, Rayon tried to conquer fire, but for some reason he was unable to do so. Opening his eyes, he still failed. Even though it's not the first time he's tried to collect aura, it's still too difficult for him. He didn't expect to learn it in one go, but he would still try to do it. The demon noticed that it wasn't very easy for Raon, even though he was putting in more effort. But it also noticed that if someone touched him during cultivation, he could lose his energy core or die. It would be sad to die after barely obtaining such a cultivation technique. Rayon pondered over his words. After all, this anger demon was not his friend and would be able to attack at the worst possible moment. Moreover, the cultivation of 10,000 lights absorbs the user's mana to strengthen the aura in the energy center. If someone interrupted him at such an important moment, his mana flow or energy center could all break down. Because of his curse, the danger only increases. The demon wondered what could happen if he interfered. But Raon realized that it would be disadvantageous for him to intervene. The demon only needed to interrupt his cultivation once and absorb him. Raon smilingly asked the demon if he really wanted to absorb a destroyed body. But he didn't care what kind of body he would get. It would be very bad if the body was without limbs, but even that would be fine. And even if his energy center exploded, the Essence King would be able to restore them. Rayon showed himself as if he didn't care, and the demon wouldn't succeed. But the demon didn't care. He assumed Rayon was bluffing. He hoped Rayon would be trembling with fear because the Essence King could pierce his mind at any moment. Rayon saw this demon as nothing but an enemy and would be very happy to get rid of him as soon as possible. After all, he was a messenger from the devil himself, trying to get his body as soon as he had the chance. Rayon already thought that the demon had given up long ago because it had been quite a while. Now he would have to be more careful. But Rayon didn't care about that now, because he had more urgent things to do. The demon asked if he would take care of her, to which he received a firm answer, yes. That she came here every night was certainly no coincidence. She had to be dealt with, and our hero would have to go back to his old job. This girl was the meadow of the outhouse where Rayon lived. Her name was Judiel. At the time, she wrote a letter about how Rayon had been talking to himself lately, and also wanted to report one detail. She wrote about the advanced cultivation technique he had received, and that she didn't expect Rayon to receive it for just a bronze token. The mana flow she felt from cultivating his aura was outstanding, to say the least. For the Central Martial Arts Palace, this information would definitely be important, she wrote in a letter. Thinking that it was an order and nothing more, he was still a child. She hoped that her surveillance of him would be over soon. Putting the leaf in the water, it began to move away from the shore towards her master. She looked at the distant leaf and sighed heavily. Just when she thought it was time to go back, a blade was held to her throat. She was ordered to be silent and not move or say goodbye to her life. She was then ordered to lower her gaze and look into the reflection on the lake, which she did. At first, she did not realize who was beside her, for he was exuding a wild thirst for murder. But as soon as she saw Rayon in the reflection, she immediately wondered if he had been following her all along. He told her how he'd felt her gaze on him constantly since the first day she'd gotten to work in the annex. Asked how she was doing, if she had been able to get any important information. She began to remember watching him and realized that he had known about it all along. She thought she was completely invisible and realized that all this time he had been purposely pretending not to notice her. Then he asked her to open her mouth, and she immediately obeyed, for she had no choice. He put a pill in her mouth for her to swallow. She immediately felt a heaviness in her chest after taking this pill and started coughing. Rayon let her go and decided to read the letter she had not had time to send. Rayon unfolded the paper and realized that it was blank. He immediately realized that he needed a special reaction to read it. He began to list: water, earth, fire, wind, moonlight, sunlight. Looking at her, he realized it was moonlight. She was very surprised at his skills. She asked him how he knew, but Rayon started listing names of who this letter could be addressed to. Eris Sieghart, Karun Sieghart, Denier. So the order was given by Karun Sieghart after all. She couldn't understand how he was doing it, for it was impossible. Her expression was emotionless. She had trained for years to become a flawless spy. He couldn't understand everything so easily. Afterward, she could guess her burning pain in her body, and the fact that he had no problem reading her mind. There was only one explanation for that: the fact that he had fed her a raging worm, just like Tellus had once fed Rayon. She began to remember how she had been given this assignment, how she had been ordered to go to the annex and report all information about Sylvia and Rayon. They had also promised to reward her with something valuable for a job well done. She asked Rayon if he had fed her a raging worm. Ron was surprised he didn't think she knew what it was. After which, she coughed heavily. She realized that by placing it in a person's body, the creator not only had access to the target's location, but also to their thoughts. The raging worm was known as one of the worst curses in the world, for it allowed the target to be killed whenever the creator wished, moreover, with incredibly intense pain. And this reaction of the body was, without a doubt, a raging worm. Rayon surmised that since she was sending these letters to Karun Sieghart, she must be a spy from the Central Martial Arts Palace. Her mission must have started 7 months ago after the justice ceremony. Praised her for doing a pretty good job of investigation. She wrote not only about him, but also about Sylvia and Helen, and mentioned other servants. She thought the mission would be easy, but as it turned out, it only seemed so. Getting information about Rayon, an ordinary child, and Sylvia, whose body had been mutilated, seemed very easy. She realized that there was a real monster inside Rayon, so she decided to rewrite the letter and not reveal the truth. Rayon told her that would not happen, because if she rewrote the letter and hid the truth, eventually Crown would know everything about Rayon. This would only give her away and make her realize her incompetence. Leaning over to her, a smile appeared on Rayon's face. He informed her that she would now be a double agent, would report obvious things that would be revealed to Crown sooner or later anyway, while withholding more important information, as well as extracting information about Crown and reporting to Rayon. As he ordered her to come back next time with useful information, she looked up at the sky and didn't realize how she had gotten herself into this situation, because now he would be able to read her mind and destroy her at any moment. The demon wondered when Rayon had time to summon the raging worm. But Rayon would never use something so disgusting, so he fed it poison, which was why it hurt so badly. It still wasn't clear to the demon how he read all her thoughts without the ravenous worm. to which he received the answer that by various factors, certain facts can be understood. Others do not know about it, but Rayon is not like that. The demon called him a demon because of his hidden talents. After all this, Raon immersed himself in his worries and matters. He didn't even notice how the day came to go to the training ground. At the same time, although he practiced constantly, he still couldn't form an aura until the day of departure. Upon arriving at the training, Ron noticed that only 42 out of 160 people had passed. Lamel was really strict when it came to results. Ron heard his name and turned around. Luna was standing there. He turned to her. After that, they looked at each other in silence. And Luna began to remember what she had been told at home. She told how Rayon helped her to train. Her mom asked if she thanked him, to which Luna said she did and gave him a treat. But when her mom asked if she thanked him while she was practicing, Luna said she didn't. Mom wondered why she had not thanked him during the training. Luna's reply was that Daddy said never to start dialogues with boys, which amused Mommy. She turned to Luna and said that when it comes to expressing gratitude, gender doesn't matter. If you get help, always thank people for it. It's a simple courtesy, don't forget it. So she started the dialogue with the word thank you. Rayon didn't understand what she meant at first, but answered her that it was fine. It wasn't clear to the demon why she suddenly decided to say thank you, but Rayon didn't have a single guess. Luna considered, her mission of Thanksgiving accomplished, and was happy about it. Dorian also attended the training and approached Rayon. He was having a hard time going through the training. He wasn't sure if he could handle this training. He was talking so much that Rayon and Demon got tired of listening to all of it. There was too much information he was presenting. As it was, he also remarked that he was very lucky that Rayon was a better student if it had been Mr. Boren. He didn't expect to see him immediately after saying those words at his back. From fright, he fell to the ground, and Boren walked straight to Rayon and met his eyes with him. They stared at each other in pitch-black silence. After which, Boren apologized to him and admitted that he had lost initially and showed him his worst side. However, he was not going to give up. He was going to do his best to overtake him. He promised to never back down and never give up. Raon and the demon looked at the whole thing and wondered why in the world a friend would have such an interesting start to the day. They agreed that it was probably a family thing. But the demon was angry, for he felt that Boren should have learned his place after Rayon had beaten the hell out of him. Rayon reassured the demon not to be angry, for his words were enough. Another man burst in on them, saying that he was a little late. Lamel had drank a lot of wine the other day and overslept, so he was late for training. He hoped that during this time, while there was no training, they had rested properly too. He congratulated everyone on passing the test and said that training would start today, right away. The exercises will be pretty much the same, but a few more training programs will be added. The first thing that will be added is cultivation techniques. Everyone suddenly turned back to see who was late for training. There was a girl standing at the gate who wasn't in much of a hurry, and it was clear from her expression that she wasn't in the mood. She started cursing at once, for she could not open the door, which she did open, so she was late. Dorian was impressed, for he knew who it was. Lamel announced that he had not supervised her before, but she was one of the failing students of the last batch. Since she would now be studying with them, they needed to get to know her. This girl's name is Martha Sieghart, and she S from the straight line. She's kind, though she doesn't seem it. First, she decided to find out who was the best student here, because she couldn't stand it when someone inferior to her would be arrogant. She wanted to test the best student personally. She challenged the best student to a duel to see who was really the best. Since no one responded in the next few seconds, she figured the top student was afraid of a fight. Ron didn't understand what was wrong with this training. Everyone is always wanting to seem better than everyone else. He introduced himself and stated that he was the top student. She smiled and realized that he didn't look like the best student in the class at all, but it didn't matter. After all, she was eager for a fight to prove to everyone that she was the best of them all. But she was paused by Boren. Turning to her, he asked why on earth she was being so dishonorable. She angrily asked what it was that he was yakking to the elder. Turning to him, she called him by name and threatened him that she could kill him if he continued with his mindless nonsense, and next time let him choose his words properly. To which he replied to her that Rayon Sieghart was recognized as the best student by the instructor and the head of the house. And she suddenly disagreed with that? He asked. She recalled him rolling a scene at the time, but won back from him that was why he was doing it that way. He doesn't want to see the pathetic ugliness he used to show himself. Rayon was surprised at how much Boren had changed during this vacation. After that, Luna stood in front of Rayon and asked Martha to leave. It was funny, since Martha liked all this friendliness, calling them trash who care about each other. Figured she would be wrong if she continued all this and started to walk away from them. But Martha couldn't stand cowards who hide behind other people's backs. They are worse than any selfish people. With those thoughts in mind, she pounced on Rayon. Boren and Luna didn't have time to see how she did it so quickly and ended up right next to Rayon. She wanted to defeat Rayon so badly that she rushed at him at once, regardless of any obstacles. But Rayon repelled her attack with an ease she had not expected. It was hard for her to understand how he reacted so quickly, since she was very fast, and even more so to easily repel her attack. But her surprise didn't end there. As Rayon decided to teach her a lesson and counterattack her, he hit her right into a block that she miraculously managed to put up, causing them to fly away from the point of impact. Boren was surprised, and Lamel enjoyed watching it. Martha looked at Ron and didn't think it would happen the way it did. She started to get angry. Stating that it was all nonsense, the ground began to crack beneath her, and her elemental mana began to rage. As she added that whatever Rayon hoped to get back on his feet when she was done with him, swinging her fist, she was ready to strike. But she was stopped by Limel. She didn't understand how he was able to get so close and stop her so quickly. Limel told everyone present not to underestimate him. He didn't like what they had set up here and pretended as if he wasn't here. Turning to Martha, he said that Boren and Luna had already learned the aura, but Rayon hadn't yet. To defeat Rayon with such a strong advantage would be unfair. He promised to let the two of them fight once Rayon had acquired the aura. Martha pulled back his hand and said she was ready to stop. Limel turned to Ron to get back in line. The demon was very angry as Ron had let her go for nothing, and she dared to attack him. He added that even freezing her for 10,000 years would not be enough. Rayon told the demon that he even struck a blow, but that wasn't enough for the demon. He wanted to destroy her. It was more advantageous for Rayon to fight her when he would need something from her. Then he could blackmail her with his position as the best apprentice, promising the demon to perform much better next time than he did today. They started their training and practiced until the evening. They were allowed to take breaks, and here was one of them. Boren was exhausted from training. It wasn't easy for him. Even though he had learned 2-star Advanced Rising Fist, but 3 stars was already difficult for him, because he needed a combination of high-level techniques to do it. But Rayon, even though he only started a month ago, even Boren took a month to learn the 7 Forms Fist. At this rate, Rayon could learn swordsmanship at the same time as him. Boren felt pressured by Rayon's growth rate. But just like everyone else, they also felt and saw Rayon's rapid growth. Martha Sieghart, she wasn't doing as well as Rayon, and also felt his strong growth as well. She had watched Rayon learn these techniques for the first time, but he was doing much faster and better than the others. Rayon didn't learn them beforehand like Boren and Luna did. Plus, his body is subject to the curse of frost. How can he train all day long with a body like that? This was the question that kept Martha's mind going, and she wasn't going to lose to him at all. People kept saying about Martha that her talent intimidated them. When she was adopted into the Sieghart household, she was still a hunter. She was much better than the members of the direct and sideline lines who only talked about being geniuses. She mocked them every time they despaired. She was always the genius and the best. But now she's consumed by anxiety. She thinks she's barely getting by. As the lady returned, she was greeted by the butler who asked if she had done a good job today. She replied, "Yep," and went on her way, and the butler decided to talk to her more, telling her not to worry so much. She didn't understand what he meant. The butler began to tell her that everyone knew that Rayon had been performing great lately, but she had nothing to worry about since they would never face defeat at Rayon's hands. To which she decided to ask him, will Rayon never be able to defeat her? She wondered how the butler knew all this. He told her that Rayon had a critical weakness that he could never get rid of. The next day, Rayon practiced just as hard. With a lot of effort, he was getting tired. But there was no time to rest. He had to keep going. Other students would come up to him for advice, to give Rayon their advice and to see if they were doing it correctly. Some couldn't ask him for help. They were shy and afraid to approach him. But his skill was marvelous. This day, Martha decided to approach him and complimented him on how well he was doing. She didn't expect Rayon to train on par with her in such a short period of time, called him a genius for his speed of learning. But afterwards, she decided to insult him by saying that because he has poor mana sensitivity, it was all pointless. It's a shame that his talent won't get him anywhere, she said. Just like that, she also added that he could at most become a swordsmanship instructor. Everyone looked at this, as did Lamel, and didn't say anything. It was expected for her that no one said a word. No one would have thought Raon couldn't master the aura, even after 4 months. After training, Martha met with the butler again, who told her that young Master Rayon had no talent when it came to aura. Afterward, he remembered how Rayon had the lowest score in the mana susceptibility evaluation ceremony. She wasn't aware of it since she hadn't been adopted yet. The only person to study aura in the 5th training hall was Rayon. On top of that, the bronze plaque would only give him a training technique that would be either average or slightly above. It will be slightly better than the techniques that are taught and that everyone starts with. He still needs to learn the training technique, so he might be the most talented in swordsmanship and combat, but he won't be able to work well with aura, so he won't be able to become a true martial artist. Martha was still angry that she had lost to Rayon, but she decided not to worry about him after all and switched her focus to Luna and Boren, just as Luna was looking at Martha at this moment. Martha inquired if she had anything to say to her. Luna only said, "Go." Martha was amused and asked, "Is that all you had to say?" Luna repeated, and Martha smilingly agreed with her and walked away. As she left, she added that she still needed to go to an advanced class that was only for straight bloodlines. Luna didn't care for her talk. It was getting dark outside, and Rayon, who had been practicing all day, decided to stop practicing for the day. He looked at his arm, and it amused him that what he was learning on the battlefield was not martial arts, but survival tactics and killing skills. The only thing that had improved was his skills as an assassin. He couldn't imagine learning anything else. He didn't know it would be so exciting and interesting, learning martial arts to improve himself. The demon was not sitting still again. He began to resent why he was the one sitting there while he was being insulted, though Rayon didn't notice when it was him who was being insulted. The demon told how Martha was always muttering something about him, to which Rayon replied that he didn't hear what she was saying at all because he was too focused. The demon was still uncomfortable and said that if such things were said about him, he would freeze her on the spot. Rayon reminded the demon again that there was no use in fighting her right now. He also added that even without the 1,000 Flames technique, he would easily defeat someone like her. Opening the doors from the hall, he was about to go to the lady, but Luna was standing there. She held a box in front of her and looked at him silently. Rayon asked why she was here at this late hour, and she opened her box and took out the last cookie, handed it to Rayon and told him to eat it. He wondered what kind of cookie it was and why it was so cool, but she only repeated again that he should eat it. Even though he had never eaten anything he had been given in his previous life, he was sure there was no way she would have given him something bad to eat. After eating the cookie, he froze for a moment, and the demon didn't realize what it was so delicious and sweet. After all, he hadn't even tasted such a thing in the demon realm. The coolness made this cookie even more delicious. Luna asked him if he liked the cookies, to which she immediately replied that it was a very delicious cookie, and he had never tasted such a cookie before. She then told him that it wasn't a cookie at all, but marble ice cream. She turned around and walked away, even though Rayon wanted her to stop. The demon wanted her to give him one more before she left, but she walked away and the demon thought she was a strange person. And Rayon had something else on his mind. He felt that Luna was worried about him. After all, Luna is very fond of sweets, just like a child. There were 4 of these ice creams, and yet she kept one for him. It would have been very hard for her to give away something she liked so much. But it did feel good. He decided that he would repay her later. When the lady arrived, he was greeted well and was even about to set the table. Afterward, a maid came up to him and showed him the report she was going to send to the intermediate battle hall. Rayon asked what they said about him, and she told him that she had been ordered to study it in detail. Because he had mastered swordsmanship and combat very quickly, but they had lost their interest because Rayon had never been able to train his aura. Raon asked what about Sylvia, and she immediately said that they were less interested in her too, adding that at this rate, they would be able to call her back. But Rayon didn't need that, because he was still going to use her. Afterward, she turned to him and asked if he hadn't learned aura on purpose yet. He replied with a smile on his face. "Who knows?" After asking her what she was thinking, and she replied in a shaky voice that it didn't matter, and apologized to him for such a stupid question. He let her go, and she left his room. The demon suggested that someone might think he was purposely not studying. And Rayon was good at using the situation and the setting to his advantage. It wasn't clear to Demon how he was training his aura with such difficulty. It was unimaginable to him. Raon didn't understand either, but he was going to keep practicing right now. The demon called him a monster and suggested he lie down to sleep, but for Rayon, training should make it easier for his aura, so he dared to train further. As he closed the window, he saw Lemel sitting in his garden playing with the birds. As soon as he noticed him, Lemel immediately asked him if he had a good sleep. Raon was wondering what he was doing here, and Lemel immediately answered him that he had come to train him. Placing a hand on his shoulder, he decided to tell him more about what attribute our hero had. The two of them were walking through the woods, and Rayon was interested in this, because Lemel had said he was going to teach him how to understand the attributes, and they were on some kind of hike. Lemel told him to stop whining and wait. Even though Lemel was lazy, he was a great teacher. Rayon was wondering how Limel was going to teach him mana attributes in a place like this. And Lemel answered him that he couldn't forget the day when he first saw his teaching technique. It was like he was looking at a flame so strong, like magma. It was a whole other dimension, were ordinary techniques, really. The boldness with which he tried to accept the coldness of his body along with the flames, instead of removing it from the mana circuits, and if he really mastered that cultivation technique. Looking at Rayon, he paused and realized that this should be enough. He wondered why exactly in the middle of the forest they had stopped. And Lemel used his aura and showed what kind of aura he had. Lemel wanted to make a wind weapon to protect his master, and what Rayon could feel now was the very wind that Lemel had chosen, even though he had weakened it to give Ron a sample. But he could see that Ron wasn't afraid of it at all. There was no childish devils in him. Lemel had felt this wind since he was born, since he was an elf. But Rayon was human, plus his mana circuits were filled with cold, so it would be even harder for him. There are many kinds of wind, warm, cold, or sharp. Lemel began to tell how he wanted to create a wind blade capable of piercing through everything, and he had achieved it. Rayon needed to find what was his. He needed to think of the fire he so desired to possess. Raon was unclear how he could see the flame. He can only set the forest on fire to see the real flame. Lemel remarked that if they saw that, their head would be cut off their shoulders. But this forest had the perfect spot for Rayon. Lemel said hello to the old man by the stove, and the old man answered him that he was sitting there wondering why the flames were acting like that, saying that they were ruining him. Rayon wondered where they were. Lemel answered him that it was the place where you could feel the hottest and most passionate fire in all the north. This place was called the Artisan's Coal Pit. This old man wondered what Lemel had brought with him this time. The man replied that he was the grandson of the patriarch, and the old man replied that he was a simple retired old man, and unless the patriarch himself was here. Rayon stared at the fire and felt its strength and power. He had seen countless flames in his past life. Bonfires he himself had made, advanced flame magic coming from the hands of a mage, and much more. But this flame, he could feel the heat and the image from it. The flame itself felt Rayon's presence. It was the very image of fire that Rayon wanted so badly to possess. Afterward, he noticed that the flames in the furnace had been reduced. The old man introduced himself. His name was Valken, also immediately warned that manners were absent here. Rayon froze when he heard his name. He remembered that this was the same artisan who had become world famous for his craftsmanship. This was the same man who had created Glenn Sieghart's true sky sword. Rumor has it that this artisan disappeared 30 years ago, and it turns out he's been here all this time. Rayon bowed to him and introduced himself. Valken asked Lemel if he had told him anything about him, but Lemel hadn't told Rayon anything. This old man, the artisan Zeichgart, he is already on penury. It's been more than 10 years since he started to light a flame here. All they do here all year round is to stoke the fire, so there is no other place where a child can feel a real flame. Valken was asked a favor to go to the blacksmith workshops. After all, Lemel felt that showing the technique to others was not a good idea until Rayon had mastered it. Valken asked what Lemel meant. He replied that it was because Rayon was Sylvia's son, and then Valken turned around to look at him. Rayon immediately said that he was not going to and would not interfere with Valken. He asked him to let him feel the flame, and Valken in turn told him what he was doing. It was golden coal. This golden coal could create much stronger flames than white or black coal. Valken has been here for 10 years. He didn't care what they were going to do here. As long as they didn't interrupt him, Rayon was pleased with his words, thanked him, and was ready to start his techniques. Still, they went outside with Lemel. Lemel noticed that Valken was very kind to him, and he didn't expect him to accept the request so easily. So he also promised to bring a really good drink for him if he treated Rayon well, and Valken told him that he wasn't the reason for all this. The flames in the furnace rose as the child entered. It was so strong that the coal shattered from the sudden rush of heat. This child's breath has the power to control fire. And if it was the child, after all, Valken hoped that the child could fulfill his wishes. He had been visiting Valken for 7 months. He thought only of the flame he longed for. He understood. People say that fire is the most fearsome and powerful element, but things turn out differently when one is able to control it properly. A trained flame is more stable than any other element. In addition, it awakens the energies of the 10,000 fires technique. He remembered Lemel telling him to visualize the flame he wanted to obtain, to visualize the fire he needed so badly, to destroy Deleuze, to help Sylvia regain the title of direct inheritance. The path to his goals, it is shrouded in darkness, where he can see nothing at arm's length. A torch lighting the way, the flame will be his weapon, through rain and snow. Unquenchable flame, that's what he needed. A fire energy stronger than normal penetrates his body. The heat of this space, the furnace, is getting inside him. He needs to focus and catch that fire, to feel it a little more strongly. Is this the spiritual state of total dedication? He sees pictures from his thoughts right in front of his eyes. He needs to concentrate a little more, but he feels his hand starting to freeze up. The demon started attacking him at the worst possible moment. It warned him that it would wait for the moment when he was weakest. The demon ordered him to freeze in place, causing his body to begin to ice over. Raon admitted that he had acted carelessly, and this was the wrong time to do so. He began to remember how the demon had done nothing lately, and Rayon had forgotten his intentions. The demon eager to take his soul, the king of the demon kingdom. Rayon's body felt like it was being torn to pieces. It was becoming difficult for him to breathe. He would die if he moved, and he would also die if he stopped the 10,000 flames technique. He tried to gather his aura together, but to survive, think. But his consciousness began to fade from such an attack. The demon noticed that his appearance in his desperate attempts to survive was so pathetic. The demon questioned him, "Do you think you can resist my strength like before? It's pointless. From now on, your body and soul belong to me," he said and laughed. All this effort and his life was pointless. According to the demon, he was no different than a man making a furnace work, but he promised to avenge Rayon. Raon had the word furnace in his head and thanked the demon for the clue, and decided to bet on all or nothing, because if he did nothing, he would die anyway. He decided that instead of absorbing the mana that was released from the heat of the furnace, he would use the mana directly from the furnace, a much stronger and hotter fire that could consume everything. Raon decided to take it. The demon fidgeted and asked what he planned to do. Rayon only mumbled that he was trying hard to do it. Valken sat by the stove and watched the golden coal. Suddenly he noticed the furnace burst into flames and he was thrown away from it. He couldn't understand what was happening. The fire in the furnace flared up instantly. He had never seen anything like this before. Not understanding what was happening to the furnace, he looked at Rayon. He was sitting in front of the red-hot furnace and didn't move. He saw Raon shivering and steam coming out of his mouth. He didn't understand how it could be so cold if the furnace was burning so hard. As he approached Raon, he asked if he was all right and began to reach out to him. As he reached out his hand to him, asking why he was shivering so much and why he was silent, Lemel instantly intervened, asked him to leave him alone, and Danti dared to touch him. Valken did not understand what Lemel was saying, for the boy might die if he was not helped. But Lemel explained to him that the boy was in a spiritual state of complete selflessness. There's nothing they can do anyway. If they do anything, he'll vomit blood and die. Valken asked if this was the cold they were talking about, and if it was true that there was nothing they could do to help. Lemel said it was too dangerous. He prayed for him not to die. Raon, on the other hand, was trying to absorb mana from the furnace. The demon tried to stop him and told Raon to stop doing that immediately, told him he didn't stand a chance. Even though Raon didn't believe it until the last moment. He'd already died a miserable death once. His meaningless past life, he couldn't close his eyes until the very end. And this time, there was no way he would let something like that happen again. The heat was too intense. At this rate, the furnace would not be able to withstand such a temperature spike. Lemel noticed that the mana in the furnace was holding at one point. He didn't believe at first that Raon was absorbing it. Raon was absorbing it more and more, and the demon couldn't hold back any longer. Grasping at the fire that had been unwilling to give in to Raon for so long, everything went silent for milliseconds, after which there was a tremendous explosion of furnace and mana. Valken's forge was blown up. Lemel tried to see something in the explosion and tried to talk to Raon. Then he saw Raon rising from the ashes and the golden flame burning brightly around him.